Usually it's nice to hear the ACLJ, the Supreme Court, and Gavin Newsom all in the same sentence.
That's right. So we are taking on what is one of the bigger cases we've taken on in quite some time. As we go to the Supreme Court, we'll be filing a cert petition asking the Supreme Court to hear our challenge as we work with others and this church, Calvary Chapel in San Jose. As the Newsom regime in California is still trying to get $1.2 million in fines against this church under COVID restrictions. So it's 2025. We're just a couple months from 2026. And the Newsom regime in California is still fighting in court, trying to take the tithes away from this church to the tune of $1.2 million over what they allege were violations of COVID protocols back in 2020. Now, you also remember that they were handing out exemptions left and right for secular activities. You also remember that the governor himself famously went to French Laundry, high-end restaurant, so that he could have a good time. Meanwhile, if you wanted to exercise your First Amendment right to worship God, they are now coming after this church for $1.2 million. I don't think that we can say that fine number enough because it is so egregious. You realize they are taking the tithes from the church, from the people that attend this church, that is going to the work of God, that is going to make California a better place and the world a better place and do ministry. And, you know, Jesus said, give to Caesar what is Caesar and to God what is God's. But it appears that Gavin Newsom and his administration want both of those for themselves.
Well, we are taking it to the Supreme Court of the United States. We're filing the petition for certiorari because what happened to the Calvary Chapel there in was outrageous. And let me underscore something that Will said. There were all these exemptions that were given by Gavin Newsom in the state of California for retail stores. He had his famous dinner. All casinos were allowed to open, but churches had restrictions that made absolutely no sense. They were ultimately held to be unconstitutional. The one restriction that made no sense is they had, for every church, you couldn't have a gathering of over 50 people, and that was true whether the sanctuary was 500 square feet or 5,000 square feet or 10,000 square feet. So none of it made sense. The courts in California, and even some of the California courts, and ultimately the Supreme Court, declared most of those restrictions unconstitutional. And the ones they did find unconstitutional were the ones that were applied to our client, the Calvary Chapel. Now you've got $1.2 million of fines being imposed on a church after the order was declared unconstitutional. I want everybody to think about this for a moment. The political machine in California, the Attorney General and the Governor, Gavin Newsom and then the Attorney General, believe that they can enforce fines on a church that's in a case where those violations were held to be not applicable because they were unconstitutionally vague. So our Supreme Court team is very active right now. The ramifications are very, very serious. This disproportionate treatment that was leveled at churches by the Gavin Newsom administration were held to be unconstitutional, yet, as Will said, and you, Logan, were talking about, they've continued to enforce or try to enforce and collect these fines. And these fines, as you all said, are coming from the tithes of the church. And that's another thing. Think about that for a moment. I want you to envision the church's checkbook with a debit of $1.2 million going to the state of California because the state of California said that the members of the church and the church leadership violated an order which was held to be unconstitutional, yet they are asserting fines. That's what this case is about.
It is ironic at the time where Gavin Newsom is obviously trying to raise his public profile, toying with the idea of after the midterms announcing he's running for president, as well as pushing this no kings kind of idea that you're seeing in the left and the Democrat Party. Meanwhile, we're almost to 2026. And with hindsight and everything, the fact that they are still trying to collect the fines, it's almost one thing if they put that in place, then they listened to the courts because of the rulings on and many of these restrictions, and then said, you know what? We're beyond that. We're past it. We're not going to still try and collect this $1.2 million from this church. But instead, they have fought it at every level of the state system, which is the entire reason we are now having to go to the United States Supreme Court to seek relief in this, because the Gavin Newsom administration and those that are in the California Department of Justice are still thinking that this is what represents California to move forward and try to collect this excessive fine against a church for something back in 2020, when so much has changed and so much of the fines and the structure of those orders were ruled unconstitutional.
That's really the biggest part of this, is that the state of California is so bent on getting this money out of the church, from the donors of that church to the coffers of the state of California, to think about this, that they are willing to fight us at the Supreme Court and fight us all the way to get money for an order that was held unconstitutional. So this is exactly what you're dealing with in Gavin Newsom. You know, they had these No Kings rally. They're the ones that act like a monarchy. And I'm going to take it one step further here. And that is, if this is allowed to continue, I shudder to think what these governments would do next. If they think they can collect money from an order that's held unconstitutional and still collect money and still seek enforcement, what will they do when they're in power or when they are appointing judges and justices to the courts? That's the real danger on this. So for our ACLJ members, we need to be forward-looking. This is a case that originated several years ago, but we have to be forward-looking. The ramifications of this case are staggering for the future.
I do want to encourage you right now to support the work of the ACLJ financially. Of course, this is one of our big drives. So know that all your donations are doubled right now. Of course, you're not paying double. There's another great ACLJ champion ready to match your donation as soon as you make it, to unlock that donation. So if you make a $100 donation, it becomes $200 effectively, so on and so on. It could be $5, it could be $500. Know that really it is the most important time of the year to support the work of the ACLJ over the next few months. And we know we need the resources to continue these fights. These are not cheap. Again, we want to have the best of the best. We want to be able to pay for everyone's travel. We want to make sure our team can go where they need to go, and our media team has those resources as well.